September 2nd, 1983, Ashford, Pennsylvania, when 17-year-old Tommy Wilcox vanished one humid Friday night. Neighbors whispered about family drama, forbidden love, and a house that never quite felt right. 40 years later, DNA profiling cracks open the Wilcox family closet, revealing betrayal, obsession, and a truth no one was ready to face. Ashford, Pennsylvania, September 2nd, 1983, the Friday before Labor Day always carried a buzz in Ashford. Kids ran down sidewalks with Kool-Aid mustaches. High school seniors washed Mustangs in their driveways, and the town hummed with restless teenage energy. That year, Tommy Wilcox was 17, skinny, suntanned with feathered hair and a smile sharp enough to turn heads. He never made it to the hayride dance. That evening, the Texaco station near Sycamore Lane was a hive of activity. Parents fueled up their Chevys while teens leaned against soda pop machines, sipping tab and flipping through mixed cassettes. Inside the diner next door, the jukebox played Fleetwood Mac's Gypsy. Faint beneath the clinking of forks and clatter of waitress banter, Tommy had been there. Shirt untucked and denim cuffed just right, waiting by the station at 6:42 p.m. According to Pete Grover, who ran the pump. Pete remembered because Tommy asked for change to call his Aunt Marlena. Said she was giving him a ride to a bonfire. Pete made a teasing comment, "Don't burn the whole orchard down like last year," and Tommy had laughed. He was always polite, always smiling. That was the last confirmed sighting. Renee Wilcox. Tommy's younger sister had gone to the bonfire expecting him to show. When he didn't by nightfall, she figured he'd flaked, maybe gone off with his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Carla Martin. What 17-year-old didn't change plans last minute? But when morning came and his bed was still made, alarm bells started ringing. Marlena lived 3 blocks away in her late husband's craftsman bungalow. She was 42, elegant in a way local women found annoying. Always red nails, leather boots, and perfume you could smell from a hallway away. Growing up, Tommy had adored Marlena. During rough patches at home, and there were many, he often stayed with her. Some thought he preferred her place to his own. When questioned, Marlena said Tommy never showed. She claimed she'd waited 20 minutes, then assumed he found another ride. Her story didn't waver, though her hands fidgeted with her silk scarf during the interview at the precinct. He was practically grown, she said. Boys that age make up their own rules. The Ashford police were small-town trained, well-meaning, under-resourced, and overworked. By day 3, they treated Tommy's disappearance as a runaway situation. He was a teenager. It was 1983. Boys like him didn't vanish. They rebelled. His parents, Paul and Maureen Wilcox, weren't much help. Their marriage had decayed into barked arguments, burned dinners, and passive-aggressive silences. They gave conflicting answers about whether Tommy had seemed troubled or distant. Maureen insisted he'd been moody lately, keeping secrets. Paul dismissed it as typical teenage bullshit. Neither of them remembered what he'd worn the night he left. A missing persons flyer was made by day 6, Xeroxed black and white. Slightly off-center photo Tommy in his football jacket, frozen in mid-laugh. It got posted on grocery bulletin boards and gas pumps. For a while, by the second week, rumors filled the vacuum facts had left. Ashford thrived on quiet gossip, and Tommy's absence lit up the phone lines. Some said he'd run off to New York. Others hinted at darker things. Was he into something shady? Drugs? Was he gay? That last whisper floated under breath in that era, not asked outright, but studied in posture and tone. And then came the talk about Marlena. She was too close to him, said one woman at the diner. Said he reminded her of her dead husband. Maybe she just liked the attention. A man at the hardware store shrugged. Boy had a smile like Elvis. Who wouldn't? Even stranger theories leaked out: a secret romance, an accidental slip, a guilty cover-up. but no one had facts. Only murmurs. Ashford High opened its doors that fall with an empty desk in homeroom and a locker padlocked shut. Teachers called roll out of habit, paused when they got to Wilcox, then went on. Outwardly, the town adjusted. Inwardly, something shifted. Halloween that year was quieter. Christmas lights dimmer. Even the football team, once unstoppable, couldn't seem to win a game. It was as if Tommy had taken a piece of Ashford's luck with him when he vanished. Private investigators came and went. Paul and Maureen eventually divorced. Marlena moved away 3 years later, citing health and new beginnings. Her place sat empty until '89, when the bank sold it to a young couple from Harrisburg. They planted a new tree in the front yard, not knowing what stories the ground held. And Renee's sweet, quiet Renee kept a box of Tommy's things under her bed. His jacket, mixtape, a birthday card he never opened. One photograph, half a photo rather, she found it behind a drawer. Tommy, on a porch swing. The other half, ripped and missing, showed only a shadowed figure beside him. The police file? Wilcox. Thomas Joseph was closed in 1985. Status: presumed runaway. Not located, last sighted. Texaco, near Sycamore Lane, 6:42 p.m. September 2nd, 1983. Case number 830927 WXIT. Sat dust-covered in a filing room, under fluorescent lights for almost 40 years. Until one August afternoon, decades later, when a backhoe clanked against something solid in the dirt behind Sycamore Lane. By mid-September 1983, Ashford's innocence had soured into scrutiny. In every grocery line, every church pew, one question floated just beneath the small talk. What happened to Tommy Wilcox? The whispers didn't take long to settle on Marlena Haverford. Tommy's aunt. Ashford folks didn't traffic in open accusations. They preferred the soft weapons, narrowed glances over pie at the diner, a bless her heart following every suspicion. But they all noticed how Marlena changed after the night Tommy vanished. She stopped wearing her long red nails. She stopped being seen. Altogether, her modest bungalow on Sycamore Lane had once been the talk of the neighborhood for all the right reasons. Box roses always blooming. Jazz records playing out the window. The faint perfume of Jeanette wafting through the hedges. By October, the yard had gone scraggly. Curtained windows stayed drawn. Lights flickered at odd hours. Some thought she was grieving. Others decided she had something to grieve for. Detective Bill Granger, the lead officer, called her in for one more interview a week after Tommy's disappearance. She wore sunglasses indoors. Her coat was corduroy, pressed sharp at the shoulders. She smelled freshly powdered, the kind of detail Granger would write down later, not because it meant anything, but because it might. He was a sweet boy, she said. But troubled lately. How so? He asked, not blinking. Marlena paused, pulling a cigarette from her clutch. The zip of her gold lighter echoed bite-sized against the room's silence. He was ... attached. And sometimes, attachment's not the same as love. Granger leaned forward. You ever tell him that? Once, he begged not to go home. He was upset, said things that didn't make sense. It's hard, being 17. Emotions run wild. She exhaled slowly, like her smoke might erase the memory. Granger made a note beside her words, evading specifics. To calm. Still, no arrest. No body, no evidence. Just gaps and tone and instinct. Not enough for formal charges. Back in town, people filled those gaps with theories. The employees at United Hardware swore Marlena acted off that whole summer. She had that boy around too often, muttered Carl, who ran the paint mixer. Too touchy. Always brushing his hair, calling him sweetheart. Not like an aunt. The pastor's wife heard they'd been seen arguing behind the church one Sunday. Voices tight and sharp. Renee's friend Gina claimed that once in June, She saw Tommy come out of Marlena's kitchen, wiping his eyes, and his shirt looked wrinkled, like he'd changed in a hurry. And then there was Hank Wilcox, Marlena's nephew from her husband's side, technically not blood to her, but still family. He was 15 that summer, acne-splotched and gangly, often spotted hovering around Marlena's back porch when Tommy visited. In October, Hank told his guidance counselor he saw something weird the night of the bonfire. Word of his statement buzzed through Ashford faster than a Polaroid developing. Hank claimed he'd been outside Marlena's place around 7:30 that night to drop off a comic book. I saw Tommy and Aunt Marlena arguing inside the kitchen. She was crying. He kept saying, "You promised." Then he stormed out the back door. Hank said nothing more happened, just that both seemed upset. But when pressed, his eyes darted, his tone unsteady. Granger included it in the official file, but noted that teenage recollections were unreliable. No corroboration. No neighbors heard yelling. Marlena denied everything. "I didn't see Tommy that night," she'd insisted. And Hank has a vivid imagination. Still, it stuck. "You promised." The phrase became a phantom in town lore. Over the next year, Ashford teens whispered it during Truth or Dare games and trick-or-treat routes near Sycamore Lane. Something had happened. They knew it. Renee was 13, quiet but observant. She said little publicly, but internally she built a soft resolve. She believed her brother wouldn't leave without telling her. He always slid her licorice when their parents fought too loud. Used to cover for her when she ditched Sunday school. He wouldn't just vanish, especially not the night of the hayride dance. The one she knew he'd picked out his shirt for 3 days in advance. Blue plaid. Washed and ironed, years later. She would still remember the faint starch smell that clung to it one morning. In early November, a strange chill blanketed Ashford. Frost streamed down windshields. The radio began forecasting snow. Renee walked to school past Marlena's house. She saw something crawl across the elder woman's face as she drew the curtains open. Eyes catching Renee's for a split second. It wasn't guilt. And it wasn't grief. It was panic, like she was watching a clock run down inside Marlena's kitchen. Things remained locked in time. Linoleum floor stained with decades of coffee spills. A glass ashtray forever half full. Cabinets that creaked no matter how slow you opened them, and that smell, a dense blend of Aquanet, cigarette smoke, and fried pork chops seasoned with anxiety. The heart of the domestic past. With a faint trace of rot between the walls, she never let anyone pass the kitchen anymore. By Christmas time, mentions of the Wilcox boy became fewer. Other concerns took over. Layoffs at the paper mill, the broken snowplow, vandalism at the train station. But whispers have long shadows. A lifetime later, retirees toasting coffee on Main Street still remember that summer, when a golden boy disappeared under small-town skies, when good intentions soured, when the truth winked from behind cigarette smoke but never quite stepped into the light. Truth is, Tommy wasn't the only person obsessed that summer, and love, when buried, unspoken, denied, misunderstood, doesn't die quietly, it mutates. Ashford's, Pennsylvania, -1985 by the second anniversary of Tommy Wilcox's disappearance. The file was marked inactive, pending evidence. Officially, not closed. But for a small-town force with 2 detectives and a stack of break-ins to investigate, it may as well have been buried. The cold case drawer in the precinct's back office stuck on one corner, requiring a sharp tug. Inside, a manila folder labeled Wilcox. Thomas J., with a smudged fingerprint on its cover. Yellowing index cards, a few blurry witness statements, and a black and white flyer Eric at the pharmacy had once taped to the register. Someone had written "last seen 6:42 p.m. in fading red ink. Outwardly, Ashford kept moving, like towns do. Summer '85 returned like clockwork. Sprinklers clicked across front lawns. Mustangs and Impalas glistened at weekend washes. Children sped past on banana seat, bikes with baseball cards rattling in the spokes. On Saturdays, the air carried that unmistakable summer blend: freshly cut grass, warm gasoline from old Toro mowers, fried dough wafting from the county fair 2 blocks over. Life didn't stop. Not for Tommy, not for anyone. Maureen and Paul Wilcox separated quietly in fall '84 and divorced by spring. No loud arguments, just forms signed with indifferent pens at the Sullivan County Courthouse. He was always her favorite. Paul muttered more than once at Smokey's Tavern. Maureen babied the boy. Let him run wild. He said it like a fact, not a confession, as if absolving himself for not noticing. Maureen retreated into drink and silence. On her porch, she'd stare toward Sycamore Lane at dusk, as if expecting someone, but not exactly hoping they'd come. The family portrait above the Wilcox fireplace came down by Christmas that year. In its place, a generic print of a seagull hovering over a lake. Tommy's bedroom was boxed up by spring. The door remained closed, its knob cold to the touch. But not all memory fades. Renee Wilcox, 2 years younger at the time of the disappearance, was 15 by then. Growing into the outline of a woman, but keeping a spirit more watchful than most teenagers her age. She didn't speak of Tommy publicly. She didn't have to. She carried him with her. Knitted invisibly into her routines. Inside her own room, a metal filing box from Woolworth's sat under her bed. Shallow rust along the hinge. Combination lock jammed open. Inside, Tommy's denim jacket. Collar still stiff with fabric starched to paper football stubs, his old Walkman, the foam ear pads disintegrating, a cassette marked Road Mix Volume 2. In his handwriting, a birthday card he forgot to open. With $5 still tucked inside, and last, a torn photo. Tommy mid-swing on the backyard porch, next to a partially ripped-away figure only. A pale wrist and the curve of a mouth remained on the missing half. Renee would stare at that photo at night, trying to reconstruct the rest. Was it Carla, Marlena, someone else? She never showed it to anyone, not even years later. Everywhere she went, reminders lingered at Elmer's Hardware. The counter still bore the nick where Tommy carved his initials with his house key at St. Luke's Church. The third pew squeaked when leaned Anna, sound he used to mimic during awkward masses to amuse her. Even the old movie marquee read like a headline: Ghostbusters, never-ending story. Where'd you go, Tommy? Teenagers snuck that last bit up, letter by letter, one July night in '84. And the manager left it there for a week. The only person who seemed to grieve in public was Mrs. Loughton, Tommy's old English teacher. He was a natural writer, she told Renee once in confidence. Had this poetic sadness I couldn't place. Like he sensed time was against him. When Renee asked if she kept any of his writing, Mrs. Loughton hesitated. His final essay vanished. I've always wondered if someone took it. The years crept forward with the politeness small towns apply to tragedies. No one asked Maureen how she was holding up. No one confronted Marlena after she left for good in '86. Her property sold to a Harrisburg couple, who repainted every wall except one. Some secrets stick to drywall better than paint, despite everything. Renee never gave up. She built questions like scaffolding in her heart, carefully, methodically. Why would he leave his cassette player? Why no note? Had she seen anything odd that night, but forgotten it? One night, winter of '87, while helping clean out the attic, she found an old shoebox tucked behind insulation, almost turned to pulp with moisture. It contained letters, unsent ones, written by Tommy Bopp, mostly half-formed thoughts, lists, sketches of ideas, fears, arguments with no recipients. But one letter stopped her cold. Dear Aunt Em, I'm sick of sneaking around. If you won't tell them, I will. I'm not ashamed, you promised. The ink had bled from rainwater, like it had been tossed away after reading. But the word promised could still be made out underlined once. The missing piece. Still incomplete. By now, people weren't whispering about Tommy. Anymore. They whispered about the paper mill layoffs, thought about kids experimenting with Walkmans and Madonna tapes, about the ATMs being installed. Downtown Tommy Wilcox had become a lost sigh in the town's memory, a pause in conversation. Then a change of subject, but memory lives in corners. Not calendars, lives in the worn rubber of a cassette, cased on the crackly smell of mowed grass and echo two-stroke fuel in porch. Swings that creak as dusk settles, and especially in the silence that follows the phrase. He was just never found, was he? What Ashford didn't know then is that truth doesn't rot. It just waits, folded beneath time, throbbing beneath silence. And sometimes, one broken machine or one stubborn construction worker's shovel is all it takes to dig it back up. August 18, 2022, Ashford, Pennsylvania. The plan was to level the half-acre of brush and overgrowth behind 300 to Sycamore Lane and convert it into parking for the new health clinic. The house itself had been gone for years, leveled in the 90s after mold and disrepair made it unlivable. The land sat empty, overgrown, forgotten, mostly. But when the county workers began excavating the far rear corner, just beyond the sagging remnants of an old hedge, the backhoe struck something hard. At first, they thought it was a tree root. Then the operator noticed the grid-like pattern under the X-play.denim. Faded, dirty, still clutching to form. Beneath that, bone.compact, thin.human. Detective Lena Morales had been with the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office for 6 years, most of them quiet. She'd handled drug arrests, domestic disputes, a few suicides, and countless deer-related traffic reports, but never a discovery like this. I want that area sealed, she said the moment she arrived on site around 3:30 p.m. Sweat bleeding through her collar in the August heat. No press, no social. Not until we know what we're looking at. The remains were unearthed carefully, each fragment bagged, tagged, documented. The position of the bones told a fragmented story, wrapped crudely in cloth. Arms folded unnaturally. The faded denim jacket, though nearly disintegrated, bore a small stitched name label. T. Wilcox Oz Football in a town like Ashford. News doesn't stay quiet long. Even before the coroner's office confirmed dental records 2 days later, the phones were humming with a single, staggering possibility. Tommy Wilcox had come home, not walking down Main Street like Renee always fantasized, but in pieces. In dirt after 39 years by August 22nd. Ashford was in a fog. WTRL radio broke the news with cautious words. Human remains found behind Sycamore Lane property appear to match those of local teen Thomas J. Wilcox, who vanished Labor Day weekend, 1983. Old-timers clutched at memory like it was bone china. 17 years old, someone whispered at the diner. Bright kid, always polite, smiled just like his mother. Dusty scrapbooks were pulled from plastic tubs. Local newspapers from 83 pages, yellowed, curling at the edges, resurfaced on kitchen counters. Teen missing. Wilcox family search continues. Read one fragile front page beside a local lotto ad and a story about the 83 worlds. Fair. Those who had children old enough to remember glanced at them now like ghosts had returned. Detective Morales grew up 2 counties over. She wasn't part of Ashford's collective nostalgia, but she recognized the smell of sleeping guilt. The kind that only lifts when someone starts asking questions with a badge. She reopened the case. Officially on August 24th, she requested Access to the original 1983 evidence box, shipped from storage. Dusty, water-warped. Much of it Unix exide. Tommy's missing person flyer. Interview notes, a receipt from Texaco, and a Polaroid photo, creased down the middle. Everything was brittle. Soaked in silence, the medical examiner's report brought everyone crashing into the present. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Rear left quadrant, time of death, indeterminable. Estimated to be within 24 hours of disappearance. No signs of post-mortem movement, predation, or attempts to relocate. He was buried quickly, close to where he fell, or was struck. A crime no longer a maybe, so morale started digging, not just in the dirt. But through conversations people hadn't wanted to revisit in decades, she tracked down Hank Wilcox. Now 58, living 30 minutes north, in Ridgeville. Hank was slow to answer the call, then finally agreed to meet. He wore a mechanic's uniform and a hollowed stare. He hadn't posted about Tommy. He hadn't mentioned him in years. Why now? Hank asked as they sat beneath an oscillating fan in his garage's break room. "You were 16, Morales said. You said back in '83 that you saw Tommy arguing with Marlena." He chuckled, dry, muscleless. "Nobody believed me then either. Did you leave anything out?" He stared at his boot. "I might have." Renee Wilcox was 52 now. Never married. Part-time librarian. Still in Ashford. She'd kept her brother's story alive in silence, not with podcasts or placards, but with presence. She met Morales at the little reading room behind Ashford Public Library. On a side table, a dogwood cafe coffee, still steaming. She wore a denim jacket. Not Tommy's, hers, but familiar. "We never had a grave," Renee said. "Now we do. But I'm not sure it helps." Morales nodded solemnly. "It's going to raise questions. People may not want the answers. I do." "What do you think happened, Renee?" Renee sat with it a moment. Then, "I think someone got desperate. I think someone made a bad decision. But I don't think it was random." From the coroner's box came something unexpected. A scrap of cloth caught between the jacket and the remains, floral. Polyester, with a perfume residue. Unusual by itself, but not meaningless. Morales had it lab tested. Results: traces of ethyl acetate and musk ambrette. Components of vintage perfume. One local perfume in 1983 matched those notes. Evening Whisper. Worn predominantly by a single demographic. Women of Marlena's exact age. This was no longer speculation. This was evidence. Morales reached out to Ashford's district attorney. Told them the case had legs. Asked for permission to initiate forensic DNA re-examination. Not from the corpse, but from what might still cling to the old denim. Or trapped in the preserved scrap of perfume-scented fabric. What they didn't know was that in a vault in Philadelphia, 40 years of genetic progress waited, not miracles. Just the science of truth, and DNA, like memory. Doesn't care how many years you've lied, it doesn't fade. It just sits, invisible, until someone asks the right question and knows exactly where to look. September 5, 2022. Harris Regional Crime Lab. Bagged scrap of floral fabric from Tommy Wilcox's makeshift gravesite sat under lead light like it was sacred. It had once been part of a blouse, polyester. Late 70s or early 80s, torn unevenly, pressed flat by 4 decades of dirt and moisture. Detective Morales wasn't a scientist, but she understood what was at stake. This wasn't about intuition anymore. This was about evidence that couldn't forget in a lab sanitized into nothingness. Forensic biologist Dr. Elaine Rowe carefully drew sample tissue from the edge of the denim and from the polyester scrap. To get DNA after this long. "We're pushing the threshold," she warned. Morales nodded. "Just tell me if there's anything left." To hear him speak. DNA profiling, invented in 1984, had revolutionized how cold cases were solved, but DNA alone wasn't enough. By the 2010s, forensic genealogy became the new front line. Law enforcement could take an unknown DNA profile, upload it into GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA, and like ripples in water see matches among distant cousins, half-siblings, or descendants who'd swabbed their cheeks for ancestry tests and clicked share with law enforcement. What yesterday required confessions, today needed only patience and a search bar. It took 12 weeks. The degraded samples had to be amplified. Carefully, any contamination could ruin the chain. But eventually, they had a viable DNA sequence, and when Morales got the call from Dr. Rowe after a long Tuesday of paperwork and budget meetings, she didn't expect what she heard. "I've got a match," Rowe said. "But it's not how you expect." Pause. "It's not Tommy's. It's from the fabric scrap." Another pause. "It's from a relative, very close relative, of Tommy's. Possibly a son." There had never been mention of a child in the Wilcox investigation. No rumor of Tommy having a girlfriend pregnant. No one in town ever claimed it. So, Morales checked the report again. No, not a son of Tommy. The familial match was too close on the maternal. Sigh. "Are you telling me the fabric belongs to a woman who was related to Tommy and had a child with him?" Morales asked. Rowe hesitated. "Then, the closest relational probability, given what's in the database, is this. The DNA came from someone who was both his aunt and the mother of his child." Marlena Morales didn't call right away. She went to the Ashford Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, clipboard in hand and questions circling her mind like buzzards. She didn't like hunches, but the math was aligning with something older than science. Human motive. Marlena Haverford was 81. Stage 4 lymphoma, confined to bed and memory now. The woman who once turned heads in cherry lipstick and heels now lay inside a faded polka dot gown. Skin paper thin, nestled beneath a quilt too big for her. The room was silent, save for the gentle clang of wind chimes outside the window, casting flickers of sun across the floor. Like stained glass, family photos lined a table. One with a dog no one remembered. Faded Polaroids of a backyard barbecue. Sheets of faces worn by time. And one picture, Marlena, young and radiant, sitting in a lawn chair. A boy beside her, laughing. Tommy. Renee hadn't lied. That closeness, that bond, it was right there, frozen in smiles too wide. Arms too comfortably draped over shoulders for an aunt and nephew. Morales sat. "Marlena, I'm Detective Morales. I came to ask you about Tommy Wilcox." Marlena blinked, slowly. "I told them back then, he never came." "I waited in the driveway." Morales nodded like the words mattered, though they no longer did. "We found him. On the property. He was buried near the back shed. Did you know that?" The old woman's face didn't change. "No, that was a long time ago." Morales set the photo on her lap. "You loved him." A second's-long pause. "I raised him. I protected him. We found DNA. Traced it through genealogy. From a piece of your clothing. You were with him when he died. You had a child with him?" Marlena's eyes shone. Not with tears, with something more complicated. Shame, maybe? Or just the exhaustion of hiding. "I didn't want it to happen," she rasped. "I didn't mean to love him like that." He threatened to tell. Morales asked gently. Marlena closed her eyes. Her mouth moved, but the words were air. He said, "If you won't tell them." "I will." She opened her eyes again, glassy now, and I told Hank to stop him. October 22, 2022, Ridgeville. PA Hank's arrest shocked no one who'd been paying attention. He didn't fight it. At 58, carrying years of beer gut weight and unresolved guilt. Hank whispered one sentence when Morales read him his rights. "She told me he was gonna break our family." I didn't mean to hit him that hard. One wrench. One moment. One lie agreed upon and never spoken again until now. Renee stood next to Tommy's gravestone at Ashford Memorial on a quiet Sunday as leaves curled around the crunching grass. She wore that same denim jacket. Holding a small velvet bag Morales had handed her, inside it, the cloth scrap, now dried and evidence logged forever. She said she was protecting him, Renee said. Morales only nodded. But protecting him from what? She whispered. No answer came. Love can twist into something unrecognizable when it grows in silence and shame, when it demands loyalty instead of truth, when it convinces a child to lie, a woman to protect the wrong person, and a boy to die. The Wilcox family room in 1983 had been like any other modest Pennsylvania living space in a working-class neighborhood. Orange shag carpet, worn thin near doorways. A wood-paneled Zenith television humming static between channels. Stacked VHS tapes still in plastic wrap. Into that room came Marlena Haverford often, without knocking. Trusted by blood and routine and made herself part of the furniture. She always brought things. Savory casseroles. Red Jell-O with canned peaches. Nylon magazines for Renee. Lipstick-stained glasses she never cleaned. Just helping out, she used to say. Maureen and Paul were fighting. Too much in those days to mind who was raising their son more consistently. It was never just the casseroles. Tommy was drawn to Marlena in a way that made some people raise an eyebrow without knowing why. She laughed at his jokes like he was older than he was. She told him he had movie star cheekbones. Let him drink a watered-down rum and coke once after a school play. She tousled his hair and later smoothed it down longer than necessary. People noticed. That school counselor. A neighbor. Nobody said it, but a cloud built slowly over Sycamore Lane. And then, one day, he started going to her house. Alone. When Morales reviewed the original file, notes buried deep in the archived case folder, she noticed the phrasing in a 1983 interview. Marlena seems more upset than concerned. A distinction that made all the difference. She asked Marlena again. In the hospice room, now quiet, but for a humidifier clicking. When did the relationship change? The old woman stared at a window slightly open, the same wind chimes clinking again. Ghosting a lullaby as she answered. He was 15, ... Maybe just barely. I was 40, she said it without tremble, but not without shame. He was vulnerable, angry. His parents were tearing him in half. I was too lonely to admit I needed help. And then one night, soft breath, a hand fluttering like paper. I don't even remember who reached first. At the time, it felt like comfort. They kept it secret for months. Marlena insisted it never happened again. A mistake, a fall from grace, she called it. As though using biblical language made it less damning. But Tommy had changed. He stopped attending early football practices. He stopped showing up for sleepovers with friends. He was seen once in the back seat of Marlena's Oldsmobile staring out the window, glassy-eyed. While she filled up at the Texaco station, more than one local said his smile just kind of vanished. And then came summer of '83. When Marlena found out she was pregnant, I told no one. She rasped to Morales. I couldn't bring that shame home. Ashford would never forgive me. She told Tommy she'd take care of it. That abortion was an option, even if whispered behind lip-stained crimson. But Tommy, impetuous and guilt-ridden, began pushing back. If you don't tell them, I will. That line had become legend in Ashford. But it wasn't myth. It was a cry, one from a boy desperate to pull truth out of its hiding place and into the light. Consequences be damned. That's when Hank entered the story again. He had always adored Tommy, looked up to him like a brother, not a cousin. Jealous, occasionally, especially of the way Marlena looked at Tommy, doted on him, praised him. It made a teenage boy confused, angry, powerless. He was 16 that summer. All elbows and resentment. And on September 2nd, Tommy came to Marlena's door, buzzed the screen with urgency. She let him in, they argued. Hank, in his own words later, sat tucked behind the staircase where nobody saw him listening. She told him, "Don't be stupid." That people don't survive mistakes like this in towns like Ashford. That some love doesn't deserve daylight. Tommy wouldn't let it go. And Marlena, panicked, opened the door to a darker act. "I told Hank to stop him. Just to delay him, calm him down," she whispered. But Hank, furious in ways he didn't understand, snapped worse. "I didn't mean to hit him that hard." He confessed to Morales. He jerked away from me. Said not to touch him, and I panicked. I grabbed the wrench because it was the only thing around. One swing. One sick crack. Tommy didn't get back up. Marlena didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply knelt by his side, smoothed his hair down with one palm, and whispered words Hank refused to recall decades later. They wrapped him in a sheet Marlena's favorite yellow. Floraland buried him before morning in a ditch Hank had once tried to grow cucumber vines in behind the shed. "She told me to go back to school like normal," Hank said, "and never speak of it again." And he didn't. Not to his parents. Not to God. When asked why they didn't just confess, Marlena answered after 4 long minutes of silence. "Because in this town, one sign spreads like wildfire. And the right fire ruins everyone." In 1986, Marlena sold her house and moved. She terminated the pregnancy the same year in a private Pittsburgh clinic under a false name. Her son and her nephew, it's both gone. Though in different ways, Morales returned home after getting both confessions hers typed. His filmed she stood in her kitchen that night beneath a brown ceiling fan. Peter Cetre's "Hard to Say I'm Sorry" playing low on the radio behind her, like some cruel soundtrack. It was a world away from DNA kits and forensic match scrolling. The 1980s clung harder than she expected. The morality of the time swirled with the tragedy. You couldn't untangle one from the other. What happened wasn't a monster in the woods. It was lonely love, pride, denial, fear. It was what happens when no adult says stop. And when silence finishes, what guilt begins in her final week. Marlena whispered something to the nurse on duty. A request. "Leave the back window open," she said. "I want the chimes. To tell him I'm sorry." October 29, 2022, Ashford, Pennsylvania. The day Detective Morales returned the metal box. Renee waited until well after sundown to open it again. It had lived under her bed for 4 decades. A shoebox-sized vault of stubborn belief in Tommy's goodness. In her memories, in the echo of an unfinished story, she cleared a spot on her blanket, laid the box down next to her, and cracked the rusty hinge with a flathead screwdriver. Inside, the air smelled like old ink, sun-warmed attic paper. And, just faintly, regret. She pulled out the denim jacket first. Still folded. Still smelling vaguely of the fall day he left. And then came the letters. She hadn't read most of them since high school. She hadn't been ready. Some were fragments. Pages of journal-like scrawls on notebook paper, disorganized. Intense, filled with cross-outs and underlines. Some were addressed to no one. Others, to her, but there were 4. Folded neatly, unmailed. Hand-addressed, all marked in thick black pen. Aunt M. Renee rubbed the paper between 2 fingers. Slightly waxy. He must have used her best stationery, the kind no teenage boy would touch unless something serious was in motion. The first one dated back to mid-July 1983. Tommy's. Penmanship, clean to clean. Like he'd tried hard to control something chaotic under the surface. Aunt M. I don't know if you'll read this or tear it up. I just don't know how to say this out loud anymore. I'm not okay. Not with this. I think at first, convinced myself it was love because it felt better than what I had at home, but now I look at you and I don't know who's saving who. Underneath that, in darker ink, you said what we had was beautiful. But then you said if anyone found out, they'd blame me. The second letter, from August 1983, had bent corners and traces of sweat marks on the edges. You didn't come to the game. Even though you promised, I needed you to just be there in a normal way. Like nothing ... happened. I'm trying to go backwards to be regular again, but you won't let me. You need to stop showing up at school like everything's fine. You're making everything worse. Even Hank thinks something's weird. Of all these, it was the third letter that pinched Renee's breath into her ribs. No date, but the ink was a deeper blue. There were fingerprints smudged into the fold, like he'd gripped it tightly in anger before setting it down. She read slowly, I'm telling you again. Stop trying to do this your way. Someone will get hurt. Not because you want that, but because you can't control the people you lie to. I'm going to tell them, Marlena. That's what this letter is. I'm not doing this anymore in corners, in whispers. In secret. I need to live a life I'm not afraid of. Sharp. Black ink in block letters across the bottom corner. You promised. Renee held the paper close to her chest. The scent of it, dry and dusty with time, somehow brought our 16-year-old self back to life in an instant. And more than anything, she felt it, his desperation. She reached deeper into the box. Beneath the fourth letter was a smaller envelope. It bore no name. She almost missed it, tucked under a battered Uniroyal yearbook cover that Tommy had saved from 8th grade. Inside the envelope, a cassette tape, handwritten label. Not good enough for her, she fed it into the Walkman she'd lovingly restored 5 years prior. It sputtered, then clicked to life. The sound quality was rough, but unmistakable. Tommy, singing a slow, off-key version of a song he'd written himself. She recognized the chorus melody he used to hum it on the porch swing in late summer. But this time, he cried halfway through the second verse and didn't stop. Back in 1983, Tommy hadn't been emotional in public. He wasn't prone to tears or mood swings, he joked. He carried Renee on his shoulders past the apple orchard. He made heart-shaped toast when she cried about middle school drama. He was the durable sibling, the older one, the unshakable, which made these letters feel like breaking into a locked room. Renee placed the last page out on the bed carefully, the same one Morales had referenced during the investigation. I don't think I can keep the child if what you told me is true. But I don't think I can keep this quiet either. I can't carry the weight of your shame and mine forever. We tell the truth. Or I do. What people in Ashford never realized was that they were never dealing with a predator and a victim in the usual way. They were dealing with two people, caught in emotional quicksand, both making impossible choices in a time that left no room for forgiveness. Renee recognized it not as blackmail, but as a desperate cry for reclaiming dignity. He wasn't threatening Marlena. He was pleading with her to name the unspeakable. The box now sat emptier. The papers in 2 stacks before and now after. Before he tried to go back to normal. After he realized he couldn't. Detective Morales returned that evening to pick up copies. She asked Renee, carefully, why do you think he kept these instead of sending them? Renee didn't hesitate, because even when he was afraid, he still wanted to protect her. And there it was, the thread connecting every decision, every cover-up, every slow, silent moral collapse. Compassion weaponized by guilt. Honor hijacked by fear. For all the twisted threads, The tragedy was achingly simple. If Tommy had spoken out loud what he wrote on paper, if one adult had seen past smiles in that kitchen, if someone had asked the right question at the right time, maybe they wouldn't be reading the dead. But that's the nature of truth left unsent. It ages in ink, but it never dies. November 3rd, 2022. Ridgeville. Path clatter of a steel wrench echoed from the rear bay of Hank Wilcox's garage like a metal confession. It was just past 8 a.m., and the shop hadn't opened yet. The morning sun glinted off the cracked asphalt, and the scent of old oil and exhaust drifted out through the roll-up doors. Detective Morales stood near the parts counter, respectful but unwavering. Hank emerged, wiping grease from his hands with the same shop rag he'd used for over 10 years. As always, his coveralls bore the embroidered patch, Hank Wilcox Auto, even though customers just called it the Ridgeville Garage. "I've got customers coming in," he muttered. Double quotes, 10 minutes, Morales said. "That's all I need." She pulled a folded sheet from her breast pocket and laid it across the counter. It was a Xeroxed copy of Tommy's final unsent letter, the one Renee had given her 2 nights earlier. The one addressed to Marlena with the now familiar phrase, "You promised." Hank didn't touch it, but glanced down anyway. "I've seen that phrase before," he said, voice low. "It's all anyone remembers." "I don't think you understand how clear the whole picture is now," Morales replied, making sure her tone was firm, but not cruel. "We've got DNA from the blouse, the pregnancy termination records, and the time-stamped note you gave us originally. They don't line up, Hank. You didn't ask for details." He just sighed, then turned and walked over to the back of the garage, where his old metal tool chest stood beneath a laminated poster of the 1986 Pennzoil 500. Morales followed. The tools smelled like decades of rubber gloves, cigarettes, wet winters, WD-40, and something older. Regret? Maybe? A space frozen in its own denial. Hank sat on a stool and pulled a socket wrench from the drawer, slowly twisting it in his hand. "You know," he began, "for a long time, I thought I was the only one who did a bad thing. But I wasn't." Morales stayed still. No notepad, no tape, just listening. "There was an argument," he said. "On the night of the hayride." He paused, the wrench creaking in his grip. "Tommy showed up at Aunt Marlena's like he said he would. I was already there, changing her hallway light bulbs. He had a paper in his hand. I think it was a letter. He said he was going to tell the family everything. The baby. The affair." Hank looked up at the ceiling, like memory was a flickering bulb. Marlena begged him not to. Said it would destroy her. Ruin her. Take her down with him. He yelled something like, "You already ruined me." And that's when she looked back at me. She didn't say the words. She didn't say, "Do something," but she nodded. Just once. Enough. He tapped the wrench against the metal stool leg. Clink, clink, clink. I didn't think. I just wanted him to stop yelling. So I walked over and put my hand on his arm, told him to calm down. That's all. He jerked away, tried to push past me. I panicked. His voice cracked now, so I grabbed the wrench off the stairwell shelf. One swing. He swallowed. The kind of swing you don't practice. One born right from fear. It made this horrible sound like dropping a watermelon on concrete. He looked down at the wrench in his hand, polished from habit. This one wasn't the same, but it was this exact size. Silence flooded the garage like oil spreads beneath a slow leak. Morales finally spoke. And Marlena. What did she do next? She knelt down beside him like she was praying, or maybe just surrendering. Then she stood up and told me we had to bury him. Said we were too far gone to stop now. He smiled bitterly. Her exact words. Morales furrowed her brow. Your original statement said only that you saw them arguing. Why lie for so long? Hank finally looked at her, eyes red but dry. I loved her. Not in the way Tommy did, not in that way, but she meant something to me. She always made me feel seen. Between junkyard jobs and failing to grades, she was the only adult who didn't treat me like a mistake. He rubbed his face with both hands. Helping her cover it up felt like a last chance to matter to somebody. There it was, the last lie, folded into truth and guilt. He hadn't protected her. He had destroyed himself for her. When Morales left, she walked past the counter. By then, Hank's first customer of the day had arrived, an elderly man with a tired Buick coughing into the lot. Morales paused at the threshold. A lawyer from the DA's office will contact you. They're willing to discuss a plea deal based on cooperation. Hank nodded numbly. I'm ready. For what it's worth, she added quietly, Tommy's sister said he still wouldn't have wanted you to rot in jail. He was trying to clean this up, not get revenge. Hank blinked hard, turning away. I knew that, he said. Even then, November 5, 2022. Ashford Police Department Morales closed the official case file. Status: homicide. Confessed victim: Thomas J. Wilcox B. 1966. D. September 2, 1983. Suspect: Henry Wilcox. Accessory: Marlena Haverford. Deceased evidence: DNA processing report letters. See exhibits for a G confession transcript video. Timestamp: 1 hour 24 minutes and 3 seconds. 1 hour 32 minutes and 45 seconds. Final note: victim's death was the result of a moment of impulsive violence, escalated by sustained deceit. Root cause: long-term abuse, failure of familial boundaries, and misdirected loyalty. No evidence of premeditated murder. November 6th, Ashford Cemetery. They reburied Tommy beneath a new headstone beside Renee's plot. Simple as he would have wanted. Thomas Tommy Wilcox, March 3, 1966, September 2nd, 1983. He came home. Finally, Renee pressed her hand over the cold stone, then stood back as the last clumps of soil were packed in. Above her, a chilly breeze blew through rust-orange trees, tired, trembling, still beautiful. Nothing in town was ever quite the same again. Loyalty is a sacred thing in small towns. It gets praised in wedding toasts, carved into father-son speeches. But it can rot when it clings to secrecy over honesty, and sometimes, ... the silence we keep for someone we love becomes the silence that erases them. End of segment 8. Word count: 1,168. November 20th, 2022, Sullivan County Courthouse. Hank Wilcox stood in the courtroom wearing a rumpled suit that didn't quite fit. His arms hung stiff at his sides, palms red from clenching and unclenching during the entire hearing. A thin gold crucifix hung from his neck, mostly tucked beneath his collar. His eyes didn't stray once from the wood grain on the floor in front of him. When the judge gave him 6 years, suspended for 2, with mandated psychiatric evaluation and community service, you could almost hear the breath catch in the room. Not anger, just that strange collective exhale of a town not sure who to be mad at anymore, man or moment. The DA explained the leniency. Death was unintended, crime confessed, cooperation full. Marlena's death ruled out a more complex trial. Her actions: uncharged, irredeemable by the law, judged only by time and the people, who still whispered her name like a bitter flavor. The sentence was part closure, part mercy, like stitching a wound that would always leave a scar. Renee Wilcox did not speak during the hearing. She brought no photo, no statement. She barely moved in the second row of gallery seating, dressed in a simple navy sweater, hands clasped over her knees, when Hank walked past her after the sentencing. Escorted but not cuffed, he turned his head slightly, not to look for forgiveness, but maybe to offer what little of it remained in himself. She didn't meet his gaze. She wasn't angry anymore, but some things you don't look at directly, even when they're standing right in front of you. November 28, 2022. Ashford Cemetery autumn had emptied most of the trees. A brittle gray settled over the air. Gravel crunched under Renee's boots as she carried an old Sony Walkman to the edge of Tommy's grave. She knelt carefully in her long coat and gloves, unzipped a denim pouch and unspooled a cassette. Handwritten on the label, Road Mix Volume 2T, Wilcox. She fed it into the Walkman. The mechanism clicked twice before the gears took hold. The hiss came first, that warm, fuzzy hum of analog anticipation. Then, the first song. Tommy speaking into the mic in his teenage voice. Okay? Track 1 is Pat Benatar's Shadows of the Night, because I like that we're running with the shadows part. You can skip it, Renee, if you're still mad at me. She smiled quietly. He'd recorded it sometime that summer. She could hear the difference in his voice, higher, still hopeful, before everything spiraled behind her. Wind rustled through knee-high grass that hadn't been trimmed yet. A few damp oak leaves lingered near the granite headstone. The inscription was still fresh. Thomas, Tommy. Wilcox, 1966 to 1983, he came home. Finally, from a coat pocket. Renee pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, one of the letters Morales had returned after evidence intake. The third one, the letter where Tommy said, "I'm not doing this anymore," in corners, in whispers, in secret. Renee pressed her hand to the stone. The hiss of the tape looped back softly in the headphones around her neck. "I read them all," she murmured. "I read every word." Closure is a word people like to say when they need things boxed and shelved, especially in towns like Ashford, where pain makes people noticeably nervous. The truth is, not every knot gets untied. Sometimes you just carry the frayed ends that week. The sheriff's department placed a notice in the local newspaper after continued investigation and use of modern forensic genealogy. The unsolved disappearance of local youth Thomas Wilcox has reached resolution. Our deepest condolences to his surviving family. We thank the Ashford community for their cooperation and patience. Sheriff L. Morales. The write-up ran beside a coupon for rotisserie chickens at Walker's Grocer, just another proof that life moves on whether it should or not. The reaction in town was quiet. Nobody organized a candlelight vigil. The diner put up his original 1983 missing poster on the back wall, framed, newly flattened. Next to it, a note from one of the waitresses who'd served him his last slice of cherry pie. He was kind, always tipped, always made us laugh. "I'm sorry we didn't know." Morales stood at the edge of town that Saturday, watching dusk settle past Main Street rooftops. She'd be transferring in January, a promotion with the state's cold case division. But this case would follow her. Not the facts, not the trial, but the shape of it. The way pain hides inside people until it bleeds sideways into their choices. What struck her most? There'd been no evil here, just error, denial, silence. She wrote one final note in her personal case journal before sealing the file. Closure doesn't promise peace. It only removes doubt. And what's left after doubt is something colder but kinder. The space to remember. December 2nd, Sycamore Lane 40. Years to the day since he disappeared, Renee returned to where the house once stood. The foundation was gone. Nothing remained of the hedges, the shed, or the tire swing. Just open field, bordered by sloping black locust trees. She pulled a memory from her coat. A Polaroid, the only one not recovered from the box, but from a wallet her father left behind. Tommy on the back porch, looking sideways, grinning. Next to him, Marlena. Eyes cast downward, half in sunlight, half in shade, It would have been taken weeks before his death. She tucked it into the soil by a growing sapling, so someone else can remember. She whispered, burying the first and last souvenir of a story no tombstone could ever fully tell. The tape hissed softly one last time through the headphones, then clicked off. Some answers give you peace. Others just give you a place to grieve. Ashford, Pennsylvania, December 5, 2022. The snow fell soft that week, just enough to dust the sidewalks, blanket the corners of porches, settle on top of mailboxes like powdered sugar on a cake. People in Ashford still waved when passing, still lingered in the aisles of Walker's Market too. Catch up on how your mom's hip is doing, or share stories about grandkids shuttled in for the holidays. The rhythms of the town were unchanged on the surface, but underneath, deep in the space, between smiles and silence, something had shifted at June's Diner. The same Formica tabletop booths that had seated generations still hosted quiet conversations over chipped mugs of coffee and cooling pie. On the far wall, beneath the framed articles and faded newspaper clippings, now hung two things side by side: a crisp, reprinted missing poster for Tommy Wilcox, September 1983, and just above it, in smaller print, a framed note from the Ashford Police Department, dated 2022, case closed by forensic evidence and sworn confession, in memory of a boy lost and found. It wasn't just there for vigil or tribute. It was there as a reminder, because something like this, something this close, forces a town to consider itself. Local reporter Nancy Gallagher, one of the few who'd covered the original case out of college in '83, wrote a long editorial in the Sullivan County Sentinel. We assumed it couldn't be. We assumed someone like Marlena, our Marlena, couldn't possibly be involved. Too elegant, too poised. Somebody's aunt, somebody's neighbor. The one who brought cherry cobbler to church socials. Maybe that's why we never asked the hard questions. Maybe it's easier to think tragedy falls from outside. But most times, it grows right under our porch lights. In a final interview before moving on to the State Cold Case Division, Morales offered a soundbite to PBS Radio that struck a chord with listeners far beyond. Ashford, the face of harm doesn't always look like a monster. It can look like someone who bakes pies, or someone who smiles at the gas pump. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. The story had already woven itself into Ashford's identity, quiet as breath between hymns. A week later, Morales boxed up her last file at the Ashford precinct. Wilcox case, cold resolved. Do not purge. She placed inside Tommy's dental records, the DNA tree, the confession transcript. And at the very top, she added a page she'd typed herself, not for court or evidence, but something she felt the record deserved. It was not evil that drove this story, but fear, pride, silence bred from misplaced loyalty. The kind that whispers, "We'll just get through this, even when this is already breaking someone in half." She taped the box shut, pressed it onto the shelf behind the badge wall, and left it behind in Ashford. There had always been a belief that if something looked fine, it must be a dented mailbox, neighborhood prank, a kid skipping school, just teen angst. And that's why nobody noticed the boy shrinking into himself. Why the most charming woman on Sycamore Lane was able to close her curtains and still raise no suspicion. Not in that era, not in that town, and yet, some always suspected, like Miss Barker, the retired music teacher, who admitted in a voicemail to the sheriff's department that she'd once seen Marlena brushing Tommy's hair with both hands, as if it was hers to fix. Or Reverend Chase, who now recalled how one counseling session with Tommy had ended with the boy whispering, "I want to live somewhere where I don't feel watched." But memories are hard to trust in hindsight. You look back and wonder if heartbreak disguises warning signs as hindsight's wisdom, or if you just looked away when you could have asked more. Renee, weeks later, experienced the strangest thing. She thought the hardest part would be hearing the extent, but at WASN single quotes, it was walking down Main Street, past all the people who remembered Tommy for his laugh, his football jersey, the day he won the peating contest at the fall festival. In 7th grade, they had never known his real story, and now that they did, they didn't know what to say, not out of malice, out of mourning. For their own failure, she began volunteering with a small nonprofit in Harrisburg, one that specialized in abuse, recovery, and intergenerational trauma. She never told them her full story, just hints, just enough to remind herself that silence has a shelf life. One of the counselors there gave her a line she would write by hand on a note card and keep in her wallet. The truth hurts more at first, but less forever. A thought remains. A truth uncovered too late. Marlena wasn't born a monster. Tommy wasn't born to suffer. Hank wasn't doomed from the start. What happened on Sycamore Lane grew because love and silence shared dangerous blood when left unchecked, too indulgent, a truth too hard to speak. Back then, a boy, too afraid to hurt the family that was already harming him. Legacy can be quiet. A plaque in the library with Tommy's name. A now cleared field with a bench facing a young sapling. Old cassette tapes, digitized and played at the local museum. Mixes full of laughter, clumsy songwriting. And one final track where he says, "Maybe one day this will make sense. Or maybe it won't. But I kinda hope someone listens." And so we did. Because sometimes the most dangerous people in a story aren't strangers in dark coats, but the ones who hand you a slice of pie and say, "Everything's fine." Sometimes the dead don't need our justice, they need our witness. Because truth, no matter how late, still matters.